I used to think the worst thing about living near people was the noise. Lawnmowers too early, music too late, arguments through thin walls. I never thought the most unsettling moments of my life would come from people I already knew by name. That's the thing about neighbors. They're familiar enough to lower your guard, but still strangers where it counts. These are even true stories I've carried with me since it's told the only way I know how. Straight, without embellishment, like confessions, you say, to get them out of your system. I'm not trying to scare anyone. I'm trying to explain why I still double lock my doors, why I check my mirrors at night, and why I've never gone back to that cabin. I almost hit him. That's how this started. It was 1:18 a.m. A Tuesday night that felt like a Sunday because the town was dead silent. I was driving home from a late shift on the county road that cuts behind our subdivision. The one with no streetlights and the tall grass that swallows the ditches. High beams on, a thin stripe of light ahead of me, and then suddenly a flash of silver green right in the lane. I slammed the brakes and felt the seatbelt punch my collarbone. My headlights washed over a man in a reflective vest, standing with his back to me like he'd been waiting in the center of the road. He didn't jump, he didn't wave. He didn't do anything you expect someone to do when a car screeches to a stop 10 feet away. I laid on the horn, cracked the window to yell, and then he took a single step to the right and drifted into the grass. No panic, no hurry, just a sideways slide into the dark, like he knew exactly where the ditch was. I recognized him when he turned his head. Not his facet stayed wrong in the glare but the cap. A faded navy baseball cap I'd seen almost every morning walking up street he lived 2 blocks over on Sycamore Road. Name was Bennett, I think. Older guy. He picked up mail for a neighbor when they went on vacation and waved at everyone, even if they didn't wave back. The vest made sense for early morning walks, but not here, not at this hour, and not miles from any houses. I rolled forward a few feet and angled the car so my lights caught the ditch. Empty. No movement. Only grass bending and righting itself in a slow ripple like a hand passing through it. I told myself he'd crouched low and moved along the ditch line. I told myself people did strange things at night and it wasn't my business. When I got home, I stood in my driveway listening. The neighborhood was dead. I stared down Sycamore Road. A porch light flicked on, then off. I went inside, turned the deadbolt, and watched the cameras on my phone for 5 minutes before I could make myself shower. At 3:10 a.m., the driveway camera pinged, a short motion clip. I thumbed it open in the dark. For 1 second, the garage door filled the screen, and at the far edge, the reflection on my car's chrome trim bloomed and shrank like light passing over it. There's a delay on motion recordings. They start after something moves. The clip had that 1 second of ghost reflection and nothing else. I got up, checked the blinds, paced the hallway. The carpet under the front window still shows the place. I wore down that night. The next morning, I drove the same route to work. Daylight turning the ditches into nothing but pale weeds. On the way home, I took the long way to avoid it. By the 3rd day, I was back on the county road, like always, telling myself it had been a Unioff. A week later, I saw the vest again, different night, close to midnight, same stretch of blacktop. This time, he was on the shoulder, facing the fields. He wasn't walking, he wasn't stretching. He was just standing with his hands at his sides, like a child at attention. As I passed, he turned his head toward the car, and in the split second between beam and darkness, I caught the brim of the hat and a pale shape where his face should be. I kept driving. I didn't brake or honk. My hands locked on the wheel, and I watched the mirror until the red glow at the back of the road swallowed itself. I told myself I should have stopped and asked if he needed help. I didn't turn around. Word got around our block a few days after that. Someone's garage got tugged open afoot in the night. Someone's package went missing. A motion camera caught a slice of a reflective vest moving close to the wall, too close to trigger the sensor again. People started locking their side gates. I moved the rake and shovel to the shed and put a padlock through the latch. I convinced myself it was a coincidence. Until the evening, I was taking the trash out and saw Mr. Bennett, daylight, cap on vest, off pulling his bin to the curb on Sycamore. He nodded to me. I nodded back and said, "You out walking late these days?" He cocked his head. "No reason to," he said. Then he smiled and added, "But I sleep light." It was a friendly voice. It didn't feel like a threat. It still made me feel like I'd let him in on something. That night, I woke up at 2:43 to a sound that I've since tried to describe in a dozen ways, and none of them land right. It wasn't knocking, and it wasn't scraping. It was like someone running a paint roller over the inside of the garage door. A long, textured pass, as if trying to cover a wide space. Then a pause, then another pass. I lay there counting the seconds, between the passes and listening for quiet shoes. The third pass didn't come. What came instead was a whisper of gravel shifting on the driveway and a light tap under the kitchen window. Somewhere around knee height, I called the non-emergency number while I waited. I stood in the hallway where I could see the front door and the glow of the garage motion sensor through the internal door seam. The sensor blinked twice. By the time a patrol car rolled past, whoever had been there was gone. There were shoe prints the next morning's mall. Neat treads, not work boots, not heavy. The deputy said they could be anything. He told me to keep my doors locked and to call sooner if I heard something again. 3 nights later, I did. It was 1:12 a.m. The sound was under the bedroom window this time. My phone buzzed before I could get to the live view. The notification read mailbox triggered. My mailbox has a cheap magnetic sensor I installed after a streak of mail theft 2 summers ago. Nobody messes with the mailbox at 1 a.m. unless they're stupid or confident. I crept to the front window and lifted the corner of the blind. Figure in a reflective vest was standing in my yard. Not at the curb, not by the box. 10 feet from the house, looking at the front door like he was deciding if it would open inward or out. The brim of his hat hid his face. I let the blind fall and called 911. When the dispatcher asked me to describe the person, I said, "I think it's my neighbor." I surprised myself hearing that word come out. The patrol car came quick. Lights washed the living room in red and blue. By the time I opened the door, the yard was empty. A second car joined the first. They walked the block, tapped on a couple of doors, and came back to say they didn't find anyone. An officer asked if I wanted to file a report, and I said yes. He took my statement and then asked, "You say you know him? From where?" I told him I thought it was the guy from Sycamore. The officer looked down the street, then said, "Yeah, I know Mr. Bennett. He had a stroke last spring, doesn't drive anymore." He let that sit there between us the next morning. I drove to Sycamore to be sure. Mr. Bennett's porch light was on, and a stack of community papers sat on the top step. Damp around the edges. A red plastic sign on the door frame read visiting. "Nurse, please knock." I stood there for 30 seconds, then turned away. I didn't want to be the person who asks a recovering man if he's been wandering around at night in a reflective vest. I didn't want him to look at me like I was crazy. I also didn't want him to say yes. The last time I saw the vest was on the county road again. I came around a bend, and there it was ahead of me, right edge of the lane. The man's shoulders hunched a little against a wind that wasn't blowing. I slowed and rolled down my window just enough to speak. "Do you need a ride home?" I said. My voice sounded wrong in that open space. He didn't answer. He stepped forward once, and the edge of the hat caught the light, and I saw that it wasn't the same hat at all. The brim was wider, the crown taller. It was a different shape entirely. The vest was the same. I drove on and didn't look back. The mailbox sensor still goes off some nights. My cameras sometimes catch a sliver of light at the edge of the frame, never the center. I've changed the angles and settings a dozen times. I switched the reflective trim on my car for matte, and the ghost flash still blooms and disappears, like something turning its shoulder toward the lens. Maybe it's neighborhood kids cutting through yards. Maybe it's a delivery driver using the wrong curb. Maybe it's nobody at all. I won't knock on Mr. Bennett's door to ask. I won't stop on the county road again. There's a folded reflective vest in the bottom drawer of my hall table. Nauf. Kind you can buy at any hardware store. I don't know why I bought it. Sometimes I open the drawer and touch it to confirm it's just nylon and tape. It's the only thing I've got that feels more solid than the story. The cabin wasn't mine. It belonged to my brother-in-law's family, 2 hours north, set into a line of spruce like a tooth on a jaw. They used it in the summers and around hunting season. I used it once in late October when my apartment building had a pipe burst and the landlord's timeline for repairs stretched from tomorrow morning to maybe Friday. I thought a couple of quiet nights would help me get out of town. When you arrive at a place like that alone, you don't realize how much you rely on other people's noises to tell you what's normal. After the first hour, every sound belongs to you. I got there just before dark. The lake was low, and the dock tilted a little to the left, like it wanted to lie down. Only one other cabin sat on that part of the shoreline, 50 yards across a small inlet. It was bigger than ours, and painted. A clean grey with white trim. There was a floodlight on the end of their dock that I'd seen on in the summer. It was off now. The whole shore felt like something that had been put away and forgotten by 9 p.m. I had a fire in the stove and a book open on the arm of the couch, more as a prop than anything else. The wind had the kind of steady push that presses branches together and makes them whisper. Rain ticked against the windows and then stopped. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of weather where you can hear your own breathing. The floor creaked in 2 places when I walked. The rug smelled faintly like cedar and damp socks. I decided I liked it. At 10:17, there was a knock. It was soft, so soft I thought for a second I'd imagined it. On instinct, I looked at the door, and then at the window beside it, the one with the sheer curtain that glowed from the stove light. The knock came again, 3 small taps on wood. Not the door, not the window frame. It sounded lower, maybe the wall beside the window, maybe the siding. I checked my phone and saw I had 1 bar of reception. I stood up and listened. The third set of taps came from the same spot, and then something made a slow sliding sound, like a boot sole turning in loose dirt. "Hello," I said, because that's what you say. The stove popped. The cabin settled. The wind gave the roof a long sigh. Nothing outside answered. I didn't open the door. I watched the window, and the curtain didn't pull or flutter. When I finally stepped closer, I could see condensation around the edges of the glass, where the cool outside met the cabin warmth. I waited for the outline of a human shape to press against it like in a movie. It didn't happen when I built the courage to crack the door and lean out. There was only the wet dark and the faint line of the dock down the slope. In that dark, the lake looked like a field of moving cloth. I told myself the knocks had been pine cones or an animal. I put the extra deadbolt on and went to bed with my jeans and socks on, the way you do when you don't want to admit you're expecting to leave. At 1:03 a.m., I woke to whistling. Not a tune, not a full breath, just the kind of twanote sound you make when testing how loud your own mouth can be without waking a child. It came from the kitchen side of the cabin, the wall that ran along the short path down to the lake. There was a back door there with a small half window. The sound came twice, then a pause, then once again. I counted the seconds, 10, 15, 20, then a quiet scritch on the door, high where the lock sits. I got my shoes and the flashlight and stood in the bedroom doorway, feeling like a child about to check the closet. The flashlight put a tight circle of light on the kitchen floor and made the cabinets look too tall. The window over the sink showed me a slice of outside that would have made a better story if anything had been in it. The whistling didn't come again. What came was the light. Across the water, the floodlight at the end of the neighbor's dock fluttered and then snapped on. It made the inlet look shallow and flat, a pale rectangle cut out of the night. The water nearest their light went white. The trees on their side showed themselves as a row of darker teeth. That light had no switch that I could reach from our side. It was either motion activated or on a timer or something I couldn't explain at all. It had been off when I arrived. It had been off when I went to bed. Now it was on. I opened the back door and stepped onto the small porch with the flashlight aimed low. There were footprints on the wet wood, not boot prints, not shoes with deep tread. Flat-soled, like the kind you get from slip-ons, simple herringbone pattern repeating end to end. They led from the path up to the door and back down. The spacing made them look patient. I followed them with the light to the edge of the porch and to the dirt, where the rain had made everything firm enough to keep shape. The prints went down to the dock and then disappeared into the first plank, out on the water. The neighbor's dock light made a steady hum I'd never noticed before. It flickered once, like it was thinking about turning back off. I waited. It stayed. I didn't sleep much after that. When I did doze, I had the kind of light sleep where the sound of your own breath confuses you. I woke at 5:42, a grey light and the whisper of rain starting again. The neighbor's dock light was off. My porch was empty. The prints were smudged at the edges, softened by the damp, but still there. They still led to the dock. I followed them to the last clear shape and then stood staring at the water as if I'd catch a shape surfacing and putting a finger to its lips. I packed my bag. I called my brother-in-law and told him about the night in small, shameful chunks, and he said, "Drive into town, get a coffee, shake it off, use it as a story." I almost did. I put my bag in the car and stood with the door open, the cabin keys in my hand, and told myself to grow up. That's when the neighbor's floodlight snapped on again. There was no one on the dock that I could see. The light laid itself across the water and held. It felt like someone putting their hand on my shoulder without touching me. I got in the car and drove. On the way out, I passed a county truck with two guys in high-vis jackets heading in. I don't know where they were going. I don't know if they saw the light. I told myself they did and that it was normal to them. 2 days later, after the landlord told me the pipe was finally fixed, I went back to my apartment. There was a folded half sheet of paper tucked under my doormat. No envelope, no stamp. On the paper, in careful block letters, it said, "Don't answer lights." No signature. I asked my neighbor across the hall if they'd seen anyone leave it, and she said no. Then she asked what it meant. I told her I didn't know. I called my brother-in-law and told him about the note. He said the cabin across the inlet was owned by a retired couple who left for Florida after Labor Day. He gave me their last name. I looked them up. They had a property management company that handled winter checks, nothing else. I emailed the office to ask if their dock light had a timer. That could be tripping at night. The reply said it did not. A week after that, I woke at 2:11 a.m. in my apartment to a sound like someone rubbing their hand across my front door very slowly. I watched the peephole until my eyes burned. I didn't open the door. In the morning, there was nothing on the mat. The paddle fan in my living room clicked twice. A small thing, probably nothing. It was enough to make me stand and walk to the window. Outside, across the parking lot, the motion light over Unit 3C flickered on, then off, then on again in a steady, measured pattern. 3 seconds on, 2 seconds off, 3 seconds on. I stood there, counting, until it stopped. I moved a month later for work. That's the official reason. It's also the truth if you don't look too hard at the timing. I still don't answer lights that come on at night. I still step around my front door mat, like something fragile is underneath it. I've been back to the lake once, during the day. The dock light across was off. No one whistled. I didn't stay to see what happened after sunset. I don't scare easily in parking lots. I grew up walking between dim sodium lamps and the sound of mufflers echoing off concrete. You learn to hold your keys in your fist because your mother told you to, not because you think you'll ever use them. The night I'm talking about, I had more reasons than usual to keep my head on a swivel. I didn't. I blame routine for that. If you do the same drive enough times, the same store, the same late hour fluorescent aisles, the same self-checkout with the same attendant reminding you where the bagging area is, you start to turn down your volume on purpose. It was 11:22 p.m. on a Wednesday. I parked on the far side of the lot because no one parks there and I can take 2 spaces without getting a passive-aggressive note tucked under my wiper. The store sat in a little retail island with a nail salon, a closed pizza place, and a gym that never seemed to have anyone in it. The 3 tall light poles that served our side were working. The far pole by the empty loading bay flickered like it had a heartbeat it couldn't get right. I saw him when I got out of the car, leaning against a concrete pillar 2 rows over, arms folded, head down, not hiding, not looking at me, just occupying space like he'd been poured there. He wore a grey hoodie with the hood up and a baseball cap under it, brim low enough to make his face a shadow. I made the mistake of classifying him gym guy, cooling down, someone waiting on a ride, maybe a mechanic from the shop on the next block taking a smoke break. I closed my door with the quiet tug I use at night and clicked the lock. The horn chirp sounded too loud. He didn't look up. Inside the store felt like a hospital at night. 2 workers facing each other in an aisle with boxes between them, talking about nothing in particular. A security guard near the front who had perfected the art of looking busy while doing nothing. I got my things: milk, paper towels, a box of trash bags, a cheap phone charger because mine had split at the head. I used the closest self-checkout, the one facing the windows. Through the glass I could see my car and the tall light poles slanting across the asphalt and nothing else. I didn't look at the pillar. I didn't want to play the game where your gaze tells someone where you'll be in 5 minutes. When I stepped back into the night, the air felt colder than when I'd gone in. I could hear the hum of the lights and the distant rumble of the highway. The pillar was empty. My brain registered relief and then immediately told me to take that relief back. Empty didn't mean gone. It meant not where you last saw him. I started walking. I kept the bags in my left hand, keys loose in my right, phone in my pocket. I passed a row of cars and paused at the corner of a big black SUV to check the sightline to my car. Clear. I moved. Footsteps behind me started up in that small half-running pace you use to make it to a door someone is holding open for you. I didn't turn. I changed angles and let the steps pass the back of me on the other side of the row. They did, then stopped. I turned then, because it's better to know, and saw the grey hoodie crouched at the rear of my car, hand out like he was reaching under the bumper. "You need something," I said. I didn't raise my voice. It came out to even, like I was asking for the time. He stood slowly, hands slipping into his hoodie pocket. He took a step back and angled his head toward the row like he was embarrassed. "My bad," he said. The voice was flat and familiar, not from a friend group. From hearing it ask for quiet in a hallway. From hearing it mutter an apology when a dog got too close to the elevator doors. "Thought it was my car," he added. "It wasn't. My car is a dinged-up compact with a cracked taillight and a bumper sticker from a festival that doesn't run anymore." The car beside me was a spotless crossover. I could see his reflection in its window more clearly than I could see his face in real life. That's how I recognized him. He lived in my building. 3rd floor, 2 doors down. I'd seen him twice with a laundry basket balanced on his hip. I'd never heard his name. "No worries," I said, because that's how you respond when you want to step out of a scene without adding new lines to it. He nodded once and peeled off toward the next row without looking at me. When he was out of sight, I reached under the bumper where he'd had his hand. There was nothing to feel. I checked the wheel wells, because my sister once showed me a video of someone zip-tying a GPS tracker under a car. Nothing, I told myself. I was paranoid and loaded my bags. I got in, locked the doors, and pulled out with my lights off for the first row, then on, then off, like I was trying to confuse anyone watching. It confused me instead. I took the back exit that no one uses and circled to the right so I could cut behind the closed pizza place and come at the main road from an angle. The grey hoodie walked past the gym windows with his head down and his hands in his pockets. He didn't look at me. That should have calmed me. It didn't. I drove home in the way you drive when you're paying more attention to what's behind you than what's ahead. No one followed close. No one drifted when I changed lanes. I pulled into the apartment complex and parked in my usual spot under the maple because the open space was comforting. I took the stairs because elevators feel like traps. On the 2nd floor landing, a black scuff mark on the concrete caught my eye. Fresh rubber, like someone had pivoted hard. I stepped around it. On the 3rd floor, the hallway light by 3B was out. My door is 3F, 2 turns away. I could hear someone's TV and someone else's laugh. Everyday noise. I passed 3B with the dead bulb and caught motion in the dark. A figure standing with his back to the door, head tilted toward the ceiling like he was listening for a leak. The hoodie. My brain wanted it to be anyone else. It wasn't. He lowered his head, turned slightly toward the hall, and said in that same flat tone, "I always forget which floor." Then he smiled without showing teeth and walked past me toward the stairs. I went inside and stood with my ear to the door until my own refrigerator kicked on and made me jump. I checked the peephole twice. I set the bags on the counter and laughed. Once, a stupid sound that came out of me because I didn't know what else to do with it. I told myself to get over it. I turned on the sink and let it run. I pulled paper towels and used too many of them. When I finally went to bed, I left the lamp on like I was sick. At 1:31 a.m., my phone buzzed. It wasn't a call. It wasn't a text. It was the small tone the app makes when a Bluetooth device you've marked as trackers to watch pings nearby for more than a minute. I'd added that alert after my sister's video. I keep it on out of habit. I stared at the screen and saw unknown accessory detected. I spent 2 minutes trying to decide if it was someone else's earbuds on the other side of the wall. Then I got up, put on shoes, took a flashlight, and went back down to the parking lot like an idiot. It took me a full 3 minutes of crawling and feeling around before I found it. Not under the bumper, not behind the wheel, stuck inside the notch of the tow hook cover, a little white coin pressed into a stripe of double-sided tape. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't techie. It was the kind of thing anyone could buy in the checkout line for their keys. I took a picture of it in place before I peeled it out. The tape left residue. I put the coin in my pocket and looked up. At the 3 floors of windows, a light went on in 3B, the apartment with the dead hallway bulb. It made a small square on the blinds. Someone moved behind it once. The light went off. I went inside and called the non-emergency line. I told the dispatcher I wanted to log a found tracker on my car. She asked if I had any suspects. I said I didn't want to accuse anyone. She said I could bring it to the station. I said I would in the morning. I didn't sleep. At 4:07, there was a soft knock at my door. Not the kind of knock you do when you want someone to answer. The kind of knock you do when you want to listen to the sound it makes. I stood on the other side, holding my breath so hard my head hurt. The peephole showed me nothing but the blur you always get when someone stands off to the side. A minute later, my phone buzzed again. Unknown accessory detected. I hadn't brought the coin inside. It was on the kitchen counter. The app showed movement, then stopped. I turned the deadbolt and the chain, and I waited for morning. By noon, I had filed a report and given over the tracker. The officer asked if I had problems with anyone. I said no one. He asked if I knew my neighbors well. I said well enough to borrow sugar, not well enough to call for a favor. He wrote something down and gave me a copy of something else. On the way out, he said, if it happens again, call right away. Nothing happened for 2 weeks. Then one afternoon, there was a note slipped under my door. Cheap lined paper torn from a spiral notebook. For words, we don't match keys. No signature. The handwriting was neat and painfully small. I stared at it until the words felt wrong in my mouth. I took it to the station and added it to the report. The officer looked at it and said, could be nothing. Could be someone who thinks you took their spot. He said it like he believed it, and I let him. I see the man from 3B sometimes still, even after I asked maintenance to replace the dead bowl, and they did. He carries a laundry basket. He wears a hat. He never looks at my door. A few months after, the parking lot, I caught him in the lobby, studying the call box like he was trying to find his own name. He looked up when I walked in and said, "You ever feel like this place is a maze?" I said, "Sometimes." He nodded like that answer, satisfied something, and stepped aside. I knew the exact second my neighbor's motion light learned my routine. It was a Thursday at 12:04 a.m., the kind of quiet where the refrigerator hum sounds like traffic. I'd stepped into the kitchen to rinse a glass when the backyard turned. White, like a stage, lit for a scene I hadn't rehearsed. The light sits on his side of the fence, halfway down, angled oddly low, as if he wanted it to catch shoes instead of faces. It snapped on and stayed on, and I stood at the sink with my hand on the faucet and told myself a raccoon had tripped it. 2 minutes later, it clicked off. I exhaled, rinsed the glass, turned to put it on the rack, and it flashed on again, harder. This time, brighter, like a camera going off without the click. I walked to the back door and looked through the small pane. Our fences meet for 20 feet, His cedar, mine pressure-treated pine that still looks a little green in daylight. Grass on my side was motionless. The shadow of the fence slats lay clean and parallel across the ground like someone drew them there with a ruler. Nothing moved. I killed the kitchen light so I wouldn't be the easiest thing to see. The yard and the kitchen swapped places in the glass. Black outside, faint reflection of me inside. The floodlight stayed on long enough to make my eyes throb. Then it went dark again. 2 beats later, it blinked on, off, perfectly spaced. If a light can clear its throat, it did. I should explain the layout. Our houses are mirror images. His kitchen looks into my kitchen across the fence and a narrow side yard. You can't see faces through those little panes unless someone is pressed right up to them. We've been neighbor civil for 3 years. I know he works nights sometimes because a delivery van with his company's name rolls up at odd hours. He knows I keep my trash barrels under the kitchen window because he once texted me to warn a lid blew off in a windstorm. We have each other's numbers because the HOA printed a directory and slipped it under everyone's mat like a party invitation at 12:11. A.M. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Not his. The text read, "Your back gate is ajar. Could attract coyotes." I stared at the words and pictured the light's low angle and thought about coyotes stepping through a gate like polite guests. I typed, "Who is this?" and watched the little bubble appear and disappear. No reply. I checked the gate. It was latched. The latch is one of those simple gravity catches you can lift from the outside with a string if you're determined. I didn't see a string. I shut it anyway, like I was pinching shut a cut. The next afternoon, I stopped him at the mailbox. "Your motion light is touchy," I said, smiling because that's the neighborhood way to package a complaint. He smiled, back half distracted by his phone. "Squirrels," he said. "They like to run the top rail." I pictured squirrels that could stack themselves too high to trip a sensor aimed at shins. "Sure," I said. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open but nothing typed and waited to see what learned. The light stayed off until 12:03. It came on, then off, then on. I stood without scraping the chair and watched. The fence line, a darker shadow, moved low and close. Not the smooth sway of an animal, but the brief, deliberate shift of a human crouch. The kind that keeps weight in the thighs and feet light. I couldn't see a face. I could see the outline of an arm raise and lower, like someone adjusting a phone. I texted him, "Your light is going off again." He replied fast, "I'm at work." He sent a photo, a warehouse aisle, metal shelving, box labels. If he faked it, he'd thought ahead. "Okay," I wrote. "Probably a raccoon." He sent a thumbs up. At 12:17, a soft tap came from under the kitchen window, waist high. The sound of a knuckle lightly touched destined wood. Once, twice, then a slow drag along the clapboard, as if someone were measuring with their hand. I didn't open the door. I didn't clear my throat. I stood and let my eyes water from not blinking dot. In the morning, I walked the fence line. On my side, the dirt showed a few shallow prints, the tread light and nondescript. At the bottom of the fence, pressed into the inside edge like a shim, was a line of folded paper the width of a receipt. I pulled it out. It looked like the kind of paper you'd get from a hardware store printer. On it, in clean type, were the words, "Replace gate screws, short, easy to charge out." No store name, no prices, just that. The back was blank. I brought the note inside and put it on the counter. For the rest of the day, I tried to convince myself it was an old scrap that drifted there. That night, 12:05, the light stuttered like it had a nervous tick. The tap under the window came again. I texted him, "Someone is in our side yard." He replied, "I'm not home. Want me to call someone?" I stared at the message. The offer was generous and ridiculous. Call who? On who? I typed, "I'll check my cameras," and then opened the app to the blank square that has shown me nothing but wind for months. I'd been meaning to aim the camera down. I hadn't. Now, it didn't matter. 2 days later, the HOA sent the monthly newsletter. The email version came to my inbox at 7:08 p.m. The paper version was tucked under my mat when I got home at 7:40. There was a short section in the middle on friendly nighttime practices. It listed things like avoid loud vehicle idling and be cautious with motion lights pointed at bedroom windows, and let neighbors know if you'll be away more than a few days. Then a line that made my jaw go tight. Please secure gates. Wildlife have been spotted testing latches. The phrase sounded familiar. I checked my counter. The receipt paper note was gone. I checked the trash. Not there. I checked the drawer, where I stick coupons. Not there. I told myself I misplaced it while making coffee. I told myself things when I should have checked the locks. That night around midnight, the light turned on and stayed on. A steady bleach on wood. It lit the seam where our fences met. I watched the seam. A hand appeared there, palm flat, fingers spread, as if someone were measuring the width of the gap. The fingers curled and the hand disappeared. I called the non-emergency line and said, "Someone's in my side yard." The dispatcher asked if I could see them. I said I could see a hand. She said an officer would patrol the street. The patrol car rolled by, slow at 12:23. The light clicked off the second it did. After the car turned the corner, it clicked on again. A minute later, a text came from an unknown number. "Thank you for checking your gate." The punctuation was perfect. That bothered me more than the words. I bought longer screws for the gate the next day and swapped them in, feeling like I was fortifying a castle that had already been breached. I also lowered my camera slipper bracket down 4 inches so the lens caught the fence seam. That evening I mowed, then sat on the kitchen floor with my back to the cabinet and waited. At 12:02, the light came on. The seam glowed clean in the camera's night mode. At 12:06, the light went off, then on again like a code. At 12:09, the camera caught motion. A shape at the seam, very close, the rounded top of a baseball cap, the knuckles of a hand pressed against my side of the fence as if feeling for warmth through wood. The person crouched, then stood, then crouched again, the movements controlled and calm. The camera grabbed 9 seconds, then stopped. When I reviewed it, the timestamp showed 12:11. When I tried to export it, the app froze and crashed. At 12:15, my phone buzzed. New text from the same unknown number. A photo of a gate latch and a ruler laid across it. The ruler's 0 mark, lined up exactly with the edge of the metal. The caption said, "Standard." I zoomed in. The counter under the latch looked like mine. The grain of the wood looked like mine. The little chip at the corner of the hinge looked like mine. I called him. "Someone is sending me photos of my gate," I said. He answered on the second ring, voice low. "I'm at work," he said. Again, I believed him. I didn't know who I was accusing anymore. Myself, maybe, for installing a life I assumed was private. The next morning, I found a small brass key on my doormat. No tag, no tape. Clean and new. It looked like a mailbox key. It didn't fit my mailbox. It didn't fit my gate. I took it to the HOA office. The manager, a woman who has lived in this street longer than anyone, held it up and squinted. "Could be a cabinet," she said. "Could be nothing." She slid it into a drawer and gave me a smile that made me feel like the one leaving strange notes. That night, I moved a chair in front of the back door and sat with the lights off. When the motion light came on, I didn't look through the glass. I stayed still and breathed shallow. The tap came at 12:07, then another, lower, like someone testing for a hollow spot. I let it happen. I let it stop. I went to bed and slept, badly, like I had to earn it. In the morning, a new thing waited under the fence seam on my side. Not paper. A small plastic bag with a handful of screws inside, each labeled with blue tape and neat handwriting. 1 inch, 1.5 inch, 2 inch. The 2-inch label had a small check mark on it. I stood there thinking of Coyote's reading measurements, then looked up to see his kitchen window across the fence. A face passed by, just far enough to be a shape, not a person. The motion light stayed off in daylight. It didn't need to talk when the sun could. I didn't call anyone after that. I put the screws in my drawer and the bag in the trash. I turned my camera to the sky and let it record weather. The motion light still learns me. It wakes up at 12:03 most nights and says what it wants to say in 2-second blinks. I don't answer. I don't test the seam. I know what the gate sounds like when it opens. That's what I listen for now. The storage cages in our building are an afterthought. Wire rectangles in a low room where the paint sweats off the cinder block when the boiler kicks. Everyone gets one, labeled by apartment number on a metal tag wired through the mesh. You put your life there in plastic bins and old duffel sweater clothes, camp stoves, photos you promised to scan one day on, then you forget it until the season changes. The first time I noticed something was off with mine. I was down there to grab the box fan I use when the AC wheezes. I unlocked the padlock and swung the door, and my nose caught a whiff of detergent that wasn't mine. Not floral, not clean cotton. Something sharp and cheap, like hotel soap. My bins were stacked the way I left them, labels facing out because I like to lie to myself that I'm organized. The fan sat where I'd put it last fall. On top of the nearest bin, though, was a small circle of dust I didn't recognize. A halo around the lid handle, like someone's hand had sat there longer than it needed to. I wrote it off. Dust happens. Smells seep. -5 minutes of peace. A week later, I stopped by after work to swap a suitcase. The cage across from mine 1 to B. Same floor as me. Different wing was open a crack. The lock hanging loose from the hasp like a broken earring inside. An empty shelf unit stood against the back wall, holding nothing but a folded moving blanket. I don't pry. I'm not the building hall monitor. I shut my cage, locked it, and told myself whoever owned 1 to B would fix theirs. That night, at 1:02 a.m., I woke to a faint buzz. Not my phone, not the fridge. A warble that rose and fell the way an old phone on vibrate does when it sits on a hard surface. It came from below my floor, through the vent I keep closed because it brings up the smell of hot pipes. It would buzz for 5 seconds, then stop. Then again, I bought into the idea that it was nothing until it synced with the turnings in my head and I sat up and said, out loud, "It's a phone." I lay back down and tried to pretend I hadn't said it. The next evening, I went down to the basement with a flashlight because the overheads down there are bad at corners. The room seemed empty in the way a room does, even when you know it isn't. My cage was locked. 1 to B was latched now, lock engaged. I stood in the center and listened. No buzz, no nothing. I crouched and put a hand on the concrete. Cool, the way basements always are. When I stood, the chain on 12B's locked, tapped against the gate like a small metal heartbeat. I thought about leaving a note on the 1 to B door to ask if they'd lost a phone. I thought about how to write that note so it didn't sound like an accusation. I didn't write it. People don't like strangers solving their problems. 2 days later, carrying down a box of books that I will never open again in this life, I heard voices, not conversation. A man's voice saying right there, and a woman saying push. The words empty of context, the way words are when you can't get the rest. The voices came from the hall outside the storage room. I stepped back into the shadows like a thief and waited. Footsteps passed. The door opened. My neighbor from the end of my Haltel crew cut, always courteous in a way that reads as practice, stepped in and went straight to one to be. He unlocked it without looking. I stayed where I was and watched between the mesh as he put a small box on the shelf and shut the door again. He didn't relock it. He left the lock hanging loose like jewelry. When he left, he turned off the light. It took my eyes a moment to adjust. In that in-between, I heard the warble again, the old phone vibrate, close and muffled. Coming from my side, I relocked my cage by feel and went upstairs in the kind of measured pace you use when you don't want the sound of your own feet to announce anything. I started keeping a list after that. In the notes app on my phone, dates, times, small things. Bazum, itrezi, A.M stops when I sit up. Want to be lock hanging again. Found my bin with lid rotated 90 degrees. It read like I had nothing better to do than notice patterns. That's what made me keep adding to it. On a Sunday afternoon, when the building was quiet except for someone's dishwasher running loud, I went down to my cage with a plan I hated. I opened my padlock, pulled the door just enough, and slid my phone inside on top of the bin with old coats. I left the voice memo app recording and shut the gate. I locked it. I went upstairs and tried to pretend I wasn't listening to my own trap. After an hour, I couldn't stand it. I went back down, retrieved the phone, and took it to my apartment like a kid sneaking a frog out of a pond. The recording was mostly boiler noise, a hum like a swallow train. At the 12-minute mark, the sound of metal on metal, faint and careful. At 12:30, a soft exhale, then the scrape of mesh against sleeve, then a small, quick buzz. Not my phone, something close to it. Then a male voice, low, saying, "No camera." I replayed that 10 seconds until my head hurt. The no camera wasn't a question, it was a calculation. I brought the recording to the building manager. She listened with the look people get when they know the next thing they say will determine how much work their day becomes. Could be the heat, she said. Could be the pipes. I said, pipes don't whisper. She didn't laugh. She told me to add an extra lock to my cage. 2 locks look like more work. She said, people don't like work. I didn't ask who people were when we were talking about tenants. The next week, I caught my neighbor from the end of the hall at the mailboxes. "Hey," I said, "do you use one to be?" He smiled in a way I hadn't seen on him before, too quick. "I think that's the unit across from you," he said. They moved. He looked at his mail like it would save him. I don't keep track. That night, at 2:07 a.m., the buzz woke me. Not steady this time. 2 short vibrations, pause, 2 more. A pattern. I went to the vent and put my hand over it and felt nothing but cold. When I lay back down, another sound came up from below, soft and wet, like someone turning a damp towel in their hands. I pictured a duffel being unzipped slowly. I pictured hands I know picking through sweaters I haven't worn since I left home. I told myself to sleep. I didn't. In the morning I went down with a stupid impulse to sit in a lawn chair by my cage and read a book until whoever it was arrived. The room smelled like bleach and heat, a wrong mix that made my eyes water. My cage was locked. The one to be locked hung open again. On the floor between them was a small white rectangle, the kind you peel off the back of double-sided tape. I picked it up and felt the tack still on it. I looked at my cage door. On the inside edge of the mesh, shoulder high, a new thing, a small plastic, smaller than a coin, stuck there, white on grey. A tracker, the kind you buy for your keys. I took a photo. I peeled it off. There was one moment, that 1 second, where I could have walked it up to the manager and handed it over and said, "Here is the thing." Instead, I put it in my pocket, like a person in a story, and went upstairs. I turned it over in my hand, like an admission. Then I opened my door to leave for work and found an envelope on my mat. Inside, a single sheet. Storage is not private. Cameras discourage theft. No signature. The font looked like something a middle manager would choose. For a memo in 1998, I gave the dot and the note to the manager that afternoon. She wrote an incident number at the top of a form and said, "We'll review." She said it the way people say, "We'll see." When I got back to my floor, my end-of-fall neighbor was propping the stair door with his foot while he balanced a flat box against his hip. He nodded to me. "You hear about the break-ins?" he asked, casual, like weather. I put a lock on my cage finally. He tipped the box toward the elevator like a joke. I said, "Good idea," and kept walking so he wouldn't have to hold the door. Nothing dramatic happened after that. The basement kept being a basement. My cage stayed locked. Sometimes my bins looked slightly straighter than I'd left them, which means nothing unless you keep a list. The buzz at night faded, then came back, then faded. A month later, a new person moved into the unit across from me. He wears headphones and keeps his head down and once smiled at me like a question. I did not ask him if he inherited 12B. I go down there less now. I keep what I care about in the hall closet, where it makes my apartment look cluttered. When I do go down, I put my hand on the padlock and wait to see if it feels warm. That's my one superstition. It never does. Heat doesn't travel through metal like that. Fear does. Neighbors make us feel like the world is manageable. You learn each other's routines. You borrow a tool. You share a nod, a smile, a warning about a loose lid or a coyote rumor. Then something small shifts, light that blinks on when you breathe. A hand at the fence seam, a lock that learns a new key on. The same closeness feels like exposure. These 7 stories don't end with proof because they didn't happen with it. They end where real life does. A noise you can't place, a picture that didn't save, a note with no name. You don't need monsters for that to be enough. You just need people close by, and the sense that some of them are looking a little too hard.